why did you join, and how busy have you been that you could never come?
Thanks, Joe. Very busy. I work as a kind of compliance and regulatory consultant. So I'm a bit of a one-eyed man in the land of the blind. I have a huge portfolio of clients who want to know how to get the right side of medical devices regulations, and I scrabble in front of them to try and give them the answers that they need. So incredibly busy, unfortunately. But the reason I joined was I was just looking for a bit of a supportive network, and I was looking for a community of intelligent, right-minded and right-thinking people who would just keep me straight and make sure I wasn't making it up, and kind of was delivering value to the clients that I've got. I've lurked, unfortunately. I don't particularly like lurkers, but I've kind of I've made use of sort of some of the resources in the background and sort of dipped into those kind of those recordings of sessions that have kind of touched a nerve and been very useful. And Joe twisted my arm and said, well, actually, you've got to kind of, you've introduced yourself, you've got to kind of show a presence. And whilst you're about it, please, can you share some useful information that might be helpful to the rest of us about something you know?
So on behalf of our little community here, a belated, but not too late, welcome to Richard Bunney. I think it's appropriate that we start with the collage of bunnies behind you.
So during lockdown, I turned 50, and my various relatives were sent one black and white photo, which was an outline of me at the time, and they were told to try and capture my inner essence. And various sisters, nephews, nieces and uncles sent back their photos and created this rather unique Warhol-inspired collage and homage to me. So unfortunately,
I just think it's interesting that you chose the bottom right one, the one that is most visible on your calls, where you are a criminal of some kind. As a marketer, I might suggest rearranging it.
What can I say? That was done for me. So they created the canvas as was. I mean, I'm very touched and very flattered, but slightly alarmed. You know, illocution and perlocution are two different things. So the way I intend to present myself and the way that I sometimes come across to my family looks like I need to make slightly more of an effort with the impact I have. But it was made with love, and
it was. I'm
that's
sure
a beautiful thing. Yeah.
And well, I think this is a fitting chance for you to redeem your criminal self and show us what an upstanding global citizen you are by teaching us a thing or two about a thing or two.
Fabulous. All right. Well, look, what I thought I'd do is maybe spend a few minutes just talking you through something that's very prescient in the UK health market, and is one of the things that quite a lot of DTX manufacturers are struggling with or navigating their way through, which is the digital technology assessment criteria that was launched by NHS probably about 18 months or so ago now, but which has started to be popularized and adopted over the last 6 to 9 months, and is now really the minimum kind of baseline that DTX manufacturers have to comply with and have to demonstrate their compliance with to be able to join in with the NHS ecosystem in the UK. It's a bit of a UK kind of specific topic, but it is also relevant for sort of wider communities, because a lot of the thinking behind the digital technology criteria has been and is being adopted as part of one of the ISO standards. So it will inform a lot of the refresh for the international standards. I think it's the 82304 refresh, which will sort of set out a kind of a baseline of what good looks like from a digital technology and a health IT system standpoint, and along with the kind of 81000 series, which is also kind of about to kind of be dropped on the international community. I think what you'll see is a degree of coherence around these standards and this way of thinking for how a DTX manufacturer demonstrates to its kind of partners and its wider ecosystem that it's developing and maintaining a health IT system, not just a medical device, in a safe and secure way. So,
Just a public service announcement for those gathered. This is an international meeting, and if you're having a hard time understanding Richard's British, Juliet's on the call. You can consult her later. Karen Deep. Eddie, technically an American, but his ear has become tuned to the British accent. I think there's one more Brit on the call. Well, Luke is a rounding error. He's around that area. So there are a number of people who can help you after the call if you can't understand what Richard said. This is a joke, Richard. Please continue.
I can speak very slowly and pause in between words as needed.
Thank you.
So that's not a problem. So I do have a little slide to share with you.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to work out
Right there in the bottom, share screen.
Share screen. There we go. So
navigating this NHS digital technology assessment criteria and nice real-world evidence framework, starring Richard Bunney, ladies and gentlemen. Put your hands together, Richard Bunney.
Thank you very much. If I just leave it in this mode, rather than kind of do a full mode, I'll be able to see you. But certainly, if you look at kind of the UK health, which is one of the largest spheres in the world, one of the things that as a nation we're most proud of. There's been quite a lot of significant changes around the ecosystem, driven a little bit, I think, by a dearth of resources. We're stretched to the point where the historical model hasn't worked. Or isn't worked. There aren't enough doctors to go around to meet them. It's getting harder to kind of forces at the point of need. And during the pandemic, I think the inability to actually kind of physically access the NHS meant that there was an impetus to kind of look at how we could use digital resources to try and kind of deliver things in a different way.
Richard, if you don't mind, I'm easily distracted on the
kind of digital technology manufacturers is that there's been a bit of an opening of different pathways.
Richard.
Sorry?
Ever since you started sharing the screen, it's been increasingly difficult to hear you. You're breaking up quite a bit. So what I would ask in this atypical situation, Maren was suggesting maybe you cut your camera and we see your slides, or vice versa, as you've done here.
Let me cut my camera and show you the slides whilst I'm and then I'll swap over afterwards.
Okay. And when you do show your slides, you can hit the X in the blue bar that talks about release notes, and you can hit the down arrow on the right-hand side so we lose the sidebar at least. And we'll be able to have more of your presentation in the screen. So just that little thing on the right there. Well, that's a start. And then lose the X next to release notes. The X next to release notes. There. Oh, brilliant. Great. Please continue. Thank you.
Notes. Fantastic. So apologies if you didn't hear any of that. What I was saying is since COVID, there's been an increased interest from the NHS point of view of using digital technologies, but there's been a bit of a stark realization that they didn't really have a framework for how to integrate these with existing systems, and also a challenge that existing healthcare provision was reaching a breaking point, both from demand and ability to sort of service sort of pent-up need. So there's been quite a lot of significant changes in the UK NHS landscape. This slide summarizes a few of them that are significant for digital technology manufacturers. And you can see, I'm not going to go through them all, but there's a couple of things to call out in terms of some new thinking around how to use real-world evidence to kind of publish to prove the sort of the efficacy of a digital health intervention, and in particularly about 6 months ago, everybody in the NHS ecosystem who was told that they had the technologies they were using to confirm whether or not they complied with the digital technology assessment criteria. And the idea behind this was to try and establish a baseline across the ecosystem to be confident that different components were meeting a minimum set of standards for security, clinical safety, and data protection to play nice with across other systems within the NHS and to protect patients' data. So if you have an app that kind of offers CBT or provides some mental health therapy or monitor health, do some monitoring and provides home hospitalization, you're providing to an NHS organization in England, or you're thinking of providing to an NHS organization. And I mentioned those because that's where the biggest uptake has been so far. You've suddenly been obliged to comply and demonstrate your compliance with the digital technology assessment criteria. And the way that you do this is you go through an assessment, which is kind of independently reviewed by some great and good subject matter experts in the NHS. And you have to meet approximately 30 kind of expectations across 5 different domains, and then you will be given a bill of health.
Richard, I have a suggestion that could make the meeting go a bit smoother. Bring yourself back on camera and take off the slides. And Mark Matthews brought up an interesting point in the chat. While you guys are discussing that, if you email me your presentation, I can display it while you speak to it.
Fab. Joe, you have the presentation already, I think.
Do you? Did you email it to me?
Yeah.
All right, then I'll do that while you and Mark have a quick discussion. Mark, would you share what you wrote in the comments?
Yeah, I just wrote that you know, Pear was the largest digital therapeutic company. They raised the most money. It was a darling child of Silicon Valley. I think their latest numbers are they were spending something like 123 million a year in costs, and the revenue was 13 million, and they just declared bankruptcy. And they're not the only one. There seems to be a huge retrenchment in the US, and Pear had all the insurance companies, and for a while there had everybody on board.
That's true. Yeah. So I think the model in the UK is slightly different. That there are still the same challenges in terms of reimbursement. If you want to get well, there is no kind of central reimbursement through the UK across the NHS. So what is happening is you're seeing a much more fragmented market where individual sort of manufacturers are agreeing deals with one of the sort of 43 integrated care trusts that kind of exist on a regional basis. I think what you're also seeing is that the innovation in the UK is being led by a lot of clinician innovators and a lot of smaller SMEs who are being supported by innovation funding. So we haven't as yet reached the stage where the companies are having to aggressively raise capital and are entering into the kind of the world of overinflated valuations that I think probably cause some of the issues with Pear. So it's the UK market, I think, is more fragmented, smaller scale, and there's still the challenges for the manufacturers. How do you kind of commercialize the innovations that you're trying to market? But there's more activity based around trying to do the right thing, or trying to simplify a process, or building out from a kind of clinical experience a tool that is going to make a different healthcare outcome.
Richard, regrettably, I see your presentation nowhere, not in any of my emails, not in LinkedIn. So if you do send it, that'd be great. And there must be something about you that is messing with the electromagnetic field of the earth, because the lights in my house just started flickering. So I don't know what's going on with you, but just keep it to yourself, could you?
Joe, I'll send you the presentation again.
It says your bandwidth is quite low. It's announcing it to everyone. So if your kids are like playing Minecraft in the other room, you got to just take control of the household. That's all I got to say. I mean, you parent the way you want to parent. But if
Okay.
someone's playing Minecraft.
Joe, let me drop off for a moment and rejoin on a slightly different network and see if that works better.
Okay. We'll entertain ourselves in the meanwhile.
Joe, I got the jokes. I thought they were funny.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
I always.
Hey,
You're welcome.
I wrote Eddie in the comments. Richard was all like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm wondering if that's a British thing, because you never used to say that when you lived in America.
Yeah, picked it up from somebody over here. I don't know who exactly.
Hey, Susie Carr, I had my annual physical on Wednesday. And although it went fine. I'm in perfect health. Anyhow,
Joe, can you still hear me?
that's much better. Just a quick moment. So I got, as controversial as this is, I got some vaccines while I was there. I got my last booster, and apparently I'd never had Hep B, so I got the first half. And in neither of those cases was a glass ampule broken. And then I thought, are ampules still a thing? Clearly they are, or you wouldn't have a business. But like the Hep B, I think, came in a one-stop package. And the booster, I think, was maybe plastic. I don't know. Having said that, in the New York Times today, there was an article about plastic being running through our bodies, just like glass, I suppose, but maybe plastic isn't as damaging. I just wanted to mention that, and I know as soon as this call is over, you will be many places, but that was concerning. So maybe we'll talk about that at some point.
Yeah, well, actually, the ampule market is growing at a CAGR. Last week I checked at 10.5, and it's because of COVID and all the vaccines that are going out. Hospitals try to avoid ampules, and they're spending more money to avoid ampules for the ready-to-use injections, which you received, and with vials, they're more expensive. But they don't, ampules store longer, so they're better for shipping, and they're cheaper and readily available, and also tamper-proof. So that's why ampules are not going anywhere. I think they're a $6 billion market right now. It's and growing at a CAGR.
I appreciate that.
Not to worry, and mostly in the States, they're trying to get rid of ampules if they can, but because of the drug shortages, ampules aren't going anywhere, and that's number one. But in India and Asia and in Europe, they're still using a lot of ampules, and our strategic partners know that and supporting Cartec. So
Okay.
no worries. It's all
Thank you
okay.
for that. And Maren, just before we return this meeting to the fully functional Richard Bunney,
Yes.
you introduced us to Marvin at 10X.
Oh,
And-
yes.
And he was delightful. And I can't remember the name of the strain of STD that begins with a T and has vaginismus in the back that he wants to test for. But I had blood work done, and I said, hey, do you test for, and I had to look it up. And she says, yeah, we do for women primarily. You need a vaginal swab, so you're not eligible. And I said,
Trichomonas vaginalis.
or something like that. And I said, so if there were one for men, how would you feel about that for your patients? And she was like, I don't know. I mean, we give the test to women and men give it to them. So anyhow, I got less than an enthusiastic response from her. That was surprising to me. For another time. Richard Bunney, welcome back to our little presentation. And
Hi.
did you have a chance to email me the deck while you were?
Yeah, I think
away?
so.
I don't know. I'm not seeing it. Which I'm sorry, everybody, for this to be clunky like this. What email did you send it to?
Joe Hayes Medical Devices Group.net. So J Hayes Medical Devices Group.net.
Okay. Well, Jay Hage isn't seeing it. And I'm refreshing. Here, it just came.
Fantastic. Sorry, apologies for that.
That's
Well,
all good.
hopefully I'm kind of back in my entirety as opposed to 30% or 50% of my digital kind of presence that you could hear before.
Yes.
Fabulous. If you can share slide 3, that will give
Yeah.
people an idea of what is kind of what are the constituent parts of the DTAC and what folk are having to kind of grapple with.
Okay, can everyone see slide 3, digital technology assessment?
Yep.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Great. So just to try and recap then and kind of give you a sense of what this is about. If you want to be part of the UK healthcare system, you need to demonstrate criteria. You need to pass 4 of the domains of the DTAC. And the expectation now on DTX manufacturers is that you can prove that you have controls and processes in place to manage your clinical safety, to meet the requirements of an NHS standard, which is called DCB 129, which is a local standard. Effectively, if you fall within the remit of the medical device regulations, you need to make sure that you need to be able to prove that you're registered. On top of that, you need to have an experienced clinical safety officer in place. And the expectation is you can provide an up-to-date hazard log that shows your risk assessment of any potential patient safety risks and mitigating controls. There's also a raft of technical assurance that is now expected if you want to sell and be part of the NHS community. That includes things like having multi-factor authentication in place for admins and users of cloud services, being able to provide some assurance that you've had your product externally tested within the last 12 months and there's no high risk vulnerabilities outstanding. Also being able to provide a degree of evidence around load testing and performance and volumetrics for your product, and demonstrating that you have in place a valid certificate for the UK Cyber Essentials scheme, which is a government scheme to establish a minimum level of control and a baseline of control, which requires you to keep your software updated and apply patches. The NHS also has a raft of principles around data protection called the Caldecott principles, and there's some good practice guidance around what you need to do to steward your patient data. All DTX manufacturers are expected to be able to provide a return to the NHS through a central portal that gives assurance that they have controls in place to manage patient data, that they have gone through the process of doing a data protection impact assessment. They have documented their data flows, they've documented their user journeys, and they can describe and have appropriate governance arrangements in place to either act as a data controller or a data processor. The other area which is mandatory to comply is around interoperability, and the expectation now is that if you are offering any APIs or if you are kind of trying to provide any service to speak to other PASs and other systems that you're using, Fire4, HL7, or one of the established NHS data dictionaries around ICD-10 coding to be able to promote kind of smooth and efficient interoperability between systems. Your APIs are expected to be in a kind of an open and common format and follow some sort of standard kind of protocols that are set out by the UK government digital service. And without these things in place, then it is now very difficult for any NHS organisation to procure or bring on board a new DTX manufacturer into their ecosystem. What we're seeing in the UK is this standard is being used and is being referenced when there are funding opportunities and funding proposals put out, which you can apply for, when NHS organisations are going out to tender for new DTXs. This is being used as part of a kind of a procurement pre-qualification, and through the innovation service and the centre, when we're kind of promoting what good looks like, then this is a kind of minimum benchmark that people are expected to comply with.
Richard, I'd like to ask perhaps Goldie or Rob, maybe David, What is the equivalent in the US? I'm sure that I'm certain FDA has some kind of technology assessment tool. Perhaps for my countrymen, is it a term that we've typically heard? Is it?
Well, this is Goldie. Health technologies is a separate discussion at the FDA, and the rules that Richard is sharing here, they have been talking similar things. They have involved the global health, the task force is IMDRF group, and they are releasing guidance documents on this topic. But the main topics are same, right? So you have a clinical safety, technical safety, your GDPR equivalent HIPAA. Then you have this large infrastructure for either you connect with, HL7 type of a framework or something else. I think all these topics would be same globally. I'm working with, in Japan, they have a similar topics being discussed. So I think every regulator is kind of coming up fast with guidance documents and trying to handle new innovative digital health technologies that they need to approve.
Thank you. Mark, you had a question for the group?
Yeah, I have a client that has developed a digital health platform, and they have a CE mark. Currently in the process of going through the MDR. Are they going to be compatible largely with the UK standards, or are there things that they need to pay attention to?
Great question. So if they have a CE marking on current thinking, the UK is going to revise its certification rules on the basis of consultation it did last year. And the expectation is that you're going to be able to place your product on the UK market with CE marking. In fact, actually, it's probably going to be more extensive than that. We'll probably accept that if you've got a product that's registered with the FDA, that you'll be able to place your product on the UK market. But we're waiting for confirmation of kind of that of the MRHA accepting the equivalence. That will give you access to the market. The other thing you need to be mindful of is if you then want somebody in the UK to buy it through the NHS, they're going to expect you to be able to demonstrate that you meet this digital technology assessment criteria. The UK market is fragmenting a little bit more. There are more private health providers. So you could sell outside of the NHS to one of the private health providers, but the vast majority of health activity is still currently taking place through the NHS, either through agreements with private health providers to provide burst capacity, or just because that's where everyone goes for their health. So if you want to sell into the NHS, you need to be mindful of two things. You need to be mindful of this digital technology assessment criteria and being able to demonstrate that you can meet this. And then depending upon whether you are selling into an individual organization, whether you want to try and engage with a center and want to get central approval for your health technology, there is also something called the NICE evidence standards, which have been published to allow digital technologies to prove that their product is safe, but also more cost effective than existing treatment. So in parallel to what I'm talking to you about today around the DTAC, there's another framework.
I just put it on the screen.
Yeah, sure. Great. Which kind of sets out what is expected from a DTX to be able to get a recommendation from the central authority of the NHS that effectively then is a kind of central point of reference for other NHS organisations to use this technology. It's fairly self-explanatory. Based on the risk profile of the application, there's different tiers of evidence that are required, and it works across, as well as safety, there's a commercial element to it as well. So you're expected to provide a degree of clinical evidence, but you're also expected to provide a cost model and a benefit model compared to existing treatment. What's really interesting about this one, and this is a little bit of a moving target, is they're piloting what they're calling early value assessments. So recently they've done a couple of pilots with DTXs that are based around, designed to treat depression and designed to treat anxiety. And they've taken about 15 DTXs in various states of development through this early value assessment process and come up with some recommendations that allow the NHS organisations to adopt and use these DTXs whilst they are in the process of developing further real-world evidence. So a bit akin to the German model for DIGAs, borrowing that kind of early value assessment model to try and effectively open the door for early adoption of DTXs in the UK.
We have one for insomnia that would be maybe very interesting.
Yeah, so I think of that. I mean, it's early doors, so I think there's been about 8 applications approved so far. Sleepio was the first one that was approved, and then Depraxis from Gaia was recently approved through one of the early evaluation assessments, and a couple of others whose names escape me. But it's run its first couple of cycles. It's still evolving. But if you have a product that you're looking to try and sell into the UK, and you're certainly looking to try and sell into the NHS, then I'd be mindful of 3 things. You know, your path to market either through equivalents from the FDA or CE, or looking at UKCA marking. But I would caveat that I wouldn't recommend anyone to go for UKCA marking at the moment until the consultation is confirmed. What are the specific circumstances you do that? I think chances are you'll be able to rely on your CE marking, your FDA marking for the next few years. And then you need to be mindful of the DTAC, digital technology assessment criteria. And then you need to be mindful of, well, how are you going to kind of demonstrate and get an approval from NICE that your intervention is more cost effective than existing therapies or interventions?
I have a question that will just highlight my ignorance, but I'm okay with that. Rob Packard, a few years ago, you taught me how small Canada is relative to the US and how complex just going across the border for us is, with a whole bunch of MD-SAP and other things that we don't deal with. And for many manufacturers, it's just not worth it for the volume that you might pick up. I'm completely ignorant about, I'm embarrassed to say, how big is the UK market relative to the fact now that they're not part of the European Union? And if I have 10 opportunities, should I blow off NHS and just do the EU?
I don't know the exact size of the market, and I imagine it depends on what product we're talking about, but in general, I think it's slightly bigger than Canada. But in orders of magnitude, it's very similar. And in terms of complexity and difficulty, I would say Canada is more of a quality system burden, and UKCA is more of a technical file burden, but both have both elements. So they're very similar. Actually, when they were talking about the Brexit and they were trying to decide what they were doing, negotiating, I had spoken to some of the MHRA leadership and suggested that they actually adopt the Canadian system because it already exists and works well. But, you know, in infinite wisdom, they decided it would be much better to start from scratch and see how well it's working.
Did they know how big you were?
I was speaking to them in person, and all the people that were speaking to me agreed, of course, because I was so intimidating. But the people that were the decision makers clearly weren't in the room.
Richard, you've never met Rob. He's like 7'5", so he's.
I've spoken with him on video, but yeah, only from the waist up. So very long legs, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you're right, Joe. I mean, it's peanuts, you know, in comparison to the EU market. If you're going to go through a regulatory kind of process, why would you go through a regulatory process to get UKCA marking that's going to allow you to sell to a very small but very important and significant island, as opposed to do, the MDR route that's going to give you access to the whole of Europe? Now, I mean, I suppose the costs are about the same. There is I suppose there is one advantage of going through the UK, that with the UK, the MRHA are not particularly bothered about where you generate your clinical evidence. So if you're mapping out a regulatory strategy and you've already got evidence from America, you can reuse that for the UK registration easier than you can for Europe. But in terms of an order of priority and making sure that your compliance and your regulatory strategy supports your commercial strategy, then your bigger market is going to be, in the EU. And I think that's part of the thinking behind this consultation. We were very keen post-Brexit to say we're going to take back control of our rules by reverting back to 20-year-old legislation, and going back to the old EU MDD. But when we've kind of, looked at what the demand is, we've looked at the kind of pressures of people getting kind of registered on MDR as well. I think we've realised that, that we're going to get squeezed in terms of access to products and potentially pharma. So the consultation, the noise from the consultation from the UK last year was that we're going to extend the timelines that will allow manufacturers to place CE marketed products in the UK. And there was mood music and some words that actually said, and we're also looking at potentially accepting products that have been authorized in other respectable markets, which effectively means FDA registered products, MDSAT registered products may get access to the UK market on that basis as well. So the shorthand on the back of that consultation in this country was that pretty much the UK CA market is dead in the water in all likelihood going forwards.
I'm sure that there's some still strong anti-Brexit folks out there who would love to point out, see what you guys have done, look at how our submissions and applications have been reduced 10, 20, 30% ever since you clowns did this. Are you aware of that being tracked, where it is, so that there is that data point? Is anyone aware of it being monitored?
There's a couple of stats that are showing what the gap is in terms of devices that are coming up for renewal, notified body capacity, and current devices that have been approved. But I don't think they're on a national basis. So it's more at a kind of pan EU level, and those are kind of fairly widely published. Effectively, not just Britain and our post-Brexit kind of wisdom. But I mean, the EU has created a kind of a monstrous bottleneck around the notified bodies for MDR that is, unlikely to get sorted out anytime soon. I mean, I did a ring round of all of the EU notified bodies this week, actually, because I'm looking at, trying to, everyone is desperately looking for some capacity to try and, get sort of medical devices certified. And if you're an active class 2A device, which by default most software is now, you need a notified body sign off. But responses range from we're not taking applications for the next 6 months to we're not taking any new business until 2025. And there's only 38, I think, notified bodies, and that includes kind of the national variations of SGS and TUV. There are a couple that do have availability and are taking on new clients this year, but overwhelmingly we've created a massive bottleneck for new products and existing products to get the CE marking and the UK CA marking they need to stay in the market.
Fair enough.
Yeah. One thing I can absolutely vouch for what Richard's just saying, and interestingly, we've just this week learned that the MHRA system for accepting and approving clinical studies is morphing and modifying in that there's now going to be a single document submission for both MHRA and the NHS ethics approval. And the model that they're using is, in fact, the US FDA clinicaltrials.gov system. And so the nice thing for us as a small company is that hopefully that means that that's going to be streamlining some of the work that we do, so that when we go for a 510K, it'll actually be, already done in the format that people want over there in the US.
Eddie, will you tell Richard what you are making? And I wonder if there's a synergy between you.
Sure. It sounds like a lot of what Richard's involved in is digital. We're very physical in that it's a medical device for urinary control issues, both first devices for chronic non-neurogenic retention in men. And we've got some other devices coming along for incontinence, one male device and one female device. Yeah, be happy to talk to you about it offline.
I don't remember you saying anything about like any kind of RFID or data collection with your device. Is that
not
phase
yet?
2, 3, 4?
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, actually, one of the one thing that we're specifically avoiding is, so hold on. Let's see where we go. There we go. So always have my show and tell ready. This is the device. It's on a delivery system, which is this bit here. And it's got a valve, and the valve is opened with a magnet. And everyone kept asking us, well, what if you lose the magnet? Well, this little bit here is a little tracker device. But we're specifically saying this is nothing to do with our device. It's something we are recommending that the patient gets so that they can keep track of it and not lose it, because we're deathly afraid of having to get into this whole area of digital validation, especially because it's not our,
I don't know that I would personally choose the terminology deathly afraid when you're talking as the head of this company. But just my 2 cents there, or pardon me, 2 pence, whatever, Richard, I don't know. Okay, let me resume the screen share. You were talking about NICE. This is the second slide you had in your presentation about that.
Probably talk to it, Joe. Actually, it's I mean, that's the reason why it's there. There was, if you go back a couple of slides, there was some a raft of detail that I'd highlighted about some of these. This is a good slide. This is these are the things that people are finding it difficult to do if they want to comply with DTAC.
I'm sorry, DTAC stands for?
The Digital Technology Assessment Criteria.
That should have been obvious, but I didn't see it in acronym form.
Sorry, these are the things that are catching people out. That I've just kind of listed there, but no, I mean, in terms of time and presentation, you've probably had a good brain dump from me. Hopefully that's kind of been useful and giving you an idea of some of the kind of key initiatives and key activity that's happening over here.
What percent of your work involves digital technology in UK? Is it all? Is that your specialty? That's
so I would say, what would I say? Probably 60% of the medical products I deal with have some software as a component. I do deal with some physical products. So I'm doing a bit of work with a wearable device manufacturer at the moment. I was doing a bit of work with a rather innovative company that had a device to mask some sound for tinnitus sufferers. But what I tend to find is, even if there's a physical product now, there's generally a software-based reporting platform or monitoring platform where it's designed for use in hospitals. So with the wearables, it's a pulse oximeter, heart rate monitor, and falls monitor, which you can use in the home, but then it links to a kind of portal that allows you, a healthcare professional, to get a bit of a view of how a particular cohort is responding in terms of trends, and gives them a few indicators as to where they need to direct their time. So predominantly software based, but at the same time also having to kind of dive into the biocompatibility and the physical manufacture and the sort of quality controls that you need around that as well. So
if my math is correct, you're 52, and so we have you to help us for the next generation of products. I'm thinking you're going to be very busy with increasingly everything needing to have a digital component. We joked at the beginning how you've been scarce here on the network because of how busy you've been and how you originally joined to gain some synergies and insights and the like. Maybe we spend 5 minutes and fill that need for you. What were some of the outstanding things that you thought this group of experts might be good for council? And perhaps some of those experts are on our call right now, and I can make that introduction so you have some new people to interact with.
That's great. Thank you very much. You put me on the spot. Rob Packard has been invaluable in providing some insight around an approach to the American market. So thank you for kind of time previously, Rob, and I'd flag that's been a massive need, that introduction has been invaluable. The biggest quandary I've got at the moment, or the biggest thing I'm trying to work through at the moment, where it would be useful to get some other insight or some sounding board, is what's the best practice for demonstrating an appropriate level of post-market surveillance for devices. So spending a lot of time and trying to develop a reusable framework that works for different manufacturers, or just embodies good practice, that's going to satisfy the MDR requirements to prove that a manufacturer is appropriately vigilant in doing post-market surveillance that meets the MDR requirements, but is cost effective and sensible and realistic. So if there's anyone in the network who's got some kind of some interesting thoughts to share on that, or some examples of good practice around what works for them, but is tailored to be just the right size, that would be fantastic to get.
And if I'm not mistaken, before I give Goldie the floor, for post-market surveillance, I know you said for clinical evidence, but is it the same that post-market surveillance data need not be UK based? It could be global for this purpose?
So yes, for the UK market it can. I think if you've got CE marking, then the expectation is you're monitoring it, the clinical evidence for your products in the countries that you're putting it on the market. But any insight and any examples from kind of any geography would be really useful to kind of just get an understanding of where people are settling on.
I'm keeping him on the network despite his attempt to cancel, so that you guys can all get a hold of him. I want to introduce you to the folks over at Basel Systems, because they have an entire module on post-market surveillance that could be very helpful for you. Goldie?
Yeah, just a comment. I mean, post-market surveillance has always been there. And I think that the biggest change with MDR is proactively getting the data or the feedback, right? So I believe that the design, how you depends on of course, the risk of the device and classification of the device. Either you can go with registries if there is a common interest in the country and there is existing registries can be joined, or a company can have their own clinical plan, which includes protocol and endpoints and stuff like that. The only difference is, in a clinical plan, you don't need a hypothesis to accept your study. Like, your primary endpoint must meet the result that you put out there for. So hypothesis, statistical analysis, those are less stringent, but you have to have a protocol to show that you are collecting data consistently and you have a plan to report on that data. So that's the biggest difference between the surveillance, which is retrospective, complaints, recalls, and stuff like that. And prospective will be that your plan to show how the data will be collected.
So that's a really helpful comment, and that's probably the challenge. I mean, I'm pretty confident that we know how to design a clinical evaluation plan, and produce a clinical evaluation report retrospectively. I work with a lot of startups or a lot of small companies who are, we generally get involved at the later stages of product design. We generally go through a pain barrier where we kind of explain to them what's required to move from a great idea to a kind of, a mature process that's going to satisfy their partners, that they've got some quality management. And then we kind of help them get through the initial certification. The challenge that that's then faced is they're generally small companies. They're generally tight on resources. They're in the SME space. A lot of them are startups, and along with the focus of marketing the product and delivering it to market, it's what's the most effective and streamlined way to satisfy that kind of prospective collection of clinical evidence to meet the new MDR requirements.
Yeah, Richard, I worked for a startup, and I appreciate the challenges that they have, right? So how I did it is I had a survey, and that also collected data for usability. So we have a group of scientists. We came up with the questionnaire, and this device was a novel device, and we collected data to satisfy different needs. So it's like your approach, I literally had 3 people, 3 scientists, and I had 15 sites. And I collected data for usability, and I collected data for the clinical evaluation. And yes, I think that a mid-sized company or a large company have no problem giving a group of scientists a plan to say, go run the study, right? That's typically what CROs do. But for a small company, you can't afford CRO, you can't afford a full clinical staff in your company. So you got to be creative to come up with how do you, if you're going to a site and if you are meeting a doctor, how do you leverage that time without kind of asking them for a specific time? So our scientists were going to witness their procedures, and we took that time to collect the information.
That's really helpful. I can see a couple of comments in the chat. What I might do is if I get a particular kind of issue, I might reach out to a couple of you after the call and pick your brains a little bit further, Joe, if in the spirit of the community, if that's all right.
Of course, that's why we're here.
Fantastic.
For premium members, I just put in the Our Weekly Call channel, a link to Richard's profile, as well as his presentation. And I'm also putting in a link to this call. The link never changes each week. So for those of you who didn't get an email for some reason or got lost, this is a generic one that you can show up as yourself. And God bless him, but we don't need 3 or 4 Rick Stocktons on this call. I mean, if you guys saw the Just for Fun where he got ice cream all over his shirt at 10X, it's, some would say embarrassing, I say endearing. It's just like you always have like that one clumsy uncle that's kind of, I don't know, I've said enough. David?
Thanks. I wanted to comment to Richard that the time has come again for your clients to start their market process in America. I would say the MDR rules have been kind of brutal, and early on absence of guidance was brutal. It was all a plot by Jeff Shuren to bring all of you back over here. So it worked. But I wanted to add another thing in post-market. I remember when MDR appeared, you could not really compare yourselves to other products. You couldn't say we're like them and they're very safe. You had to come and do your own study on your own product, collect your own data on your own product. So I'm at Cook Medical, we're huge. I think we're huge, but we have teams that are working towards post-market studies and registries and collection of data on our product. I mean, take a simple vascular, non-vascular wire guide. There's no literature. They're used. It's a commodity, and then you have to try to collect some proactive post-market data. Come to America. Maybe I didn't say that out loud, but it could be, it used to be years ago, go to Europe, but it's maybe flipped with MDR, and you want Europe. Notified body numbers are way down. As you said, I think you said it, months and months, maybe till 2025, we're not taking clients. So there are other markets, even beyond America, but just a couple comments. Thanks.
Dwayne, you added something in the chat?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if it's a startup, we want to chat here at Project MedTech. So that's it.
But you said something about
yeah. I mean, NAMSA and it was Covance, then it was LabCorp, now it's like Fortrea or something like that. They worked with a lot in the post-market surveillance world, different companies, and actually did work with startups as well, and did it in a pretty cost-effective manner, specifically NAMSA. So they are a big company, but they worked well with them. So just as a heads up.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you very much. That's been very helpful. I apologize for kind of the technical issues I had at the start. But thank you very much for spending the time with me on your Friday morning or afternoon. And yes, nice to meet you all.
You might even consider coming back. Don't worry about it. You paid me enough and didn't use the service, so I'll give you a free ride for a while. I'm that kind of guy.
Fantastic. Well, in that case, I'm sure I'll see some of you again in the future.
And I gave you all the a direct link to Richard's profile in the chat there. Next week, we are going to talk about IBD clinical performance strategies to avoid notified concerns. So, Richard, you might choose to come back next week. It sounds tangential to what you're doing. And we have some openings in May. Alex Fair is drumming up some folks who could use some concentrated consulting. And Alex, you want to just take a moment and tell those who don't know what you do for a living?
Finding the unmute button is always tricky. Hey, folks. I run MedStarter Ventures. It's a small venture fund. We accelerate and invest in early stage healthcare companies. They come up through our system of contests and challenges and events and programs. We basically use crowds like this to help us vet, great ideas, not just in medical devices, but in services and pretty much everything except pharma. We've been at it for half a decade as a venture fund. Before that, we were just a community, and I did a lot of different startups myself, some of which did okay. So the first company I would probably bring in here is Alergy, which is a watch that uses radio frequency and a dielectric spectroscope with a unique antenna that has about 1,000 times the resolution of any other RF antenna. It's gotten down to a millimeter in depth, and so it's a 32 by 32 millimeter thing that goes on the back of the watch. And then they use AI to sort the signal from the noise. The first application is glucose, hence the name Alert GY, which he was an engineer. He didn't know how we abbreviate glucose, but whatever. And so he wanted to figure out a way to so he would know when his wife was about to go into hypoglycemic shock. It worked, but initially it was the size of like a refrigerator. Now it's like the size of a watch. And so we got a new CEO there, Mark Semler from the Musk program, if you guys remember, their medical device program at Medical University of South Carolina. So he took over as CEO, raised more money. They're going into clinical trials. So they have what they need, but I thought you guys would love to meet the team, and it's very exciting because it's like an MRI you can wear on your wrist.
Make it so, Alex. Make it so. We have opportunities in many, and that goes for the rest of the team. This is not only a venue for you to show us how smart you are, but also a place where you can say, hey, I've got an issue that's multifunctional and maybe you guys can help out. I call it concentrated consulting. We did it at 10X, and I think it's a very effective way, especially for startups, to find out what they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. Those are the ones that hurt you the most. So we'll leave it there. Juliet Cook, you'll see that this was a tad more formal than last week's free-for-all. This is more of the nature of our Friday calls.
See.
Sorry?
That's been a really interesting evening.
Right, good. I just wanted to hear your accent, to be honest with you. Okay, everybody. We'll see you next week, and we'll see you on the network.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.